Good morning. I'm Rashad Salamat.
And I'm Doug Krisner. Here are the stories we're following today.
As we talk about inflation, we get that key CPI print Wednesday morning, and traders are gearing up for that. It could, of course, provide more clues on what the Federal Reserve does do next. Bloomberg's Michael McKee has a preview.
Investors have already priced for a rise in headline inflation, largely led by energy prices. The Fed can't affect those, so there's no anticipation the CPI will lead to a rate rise at next week's meeting. Instead, the focus will be on the core inflation rate. It's forecast to drop, suggesting the central bank is still making progress. Within the report, analysts will be looking primarily at housing prices, rents. After a long period pushing inflation up, they are expected to decelerate. Fed officials, of course, will also be looking at core service prices ex-housing for signs that wage growth is slowing, even though Wall Street commissions have pushed that category higher in recent months. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Radio.
We go next to Apple and the unveiling of 4 new iPhone models that happened today. These new models include the iPhone 15, 15 Plus, 15 Pro, and 15 Pro Max. Now, Apple's new Pro Max model will have a hefty price tag, $1,199. You know, that's up $100 from last year. Apple is banking on some new materials along with improved performance as a way of trying to win over consumers in a market that has been a little sluggish where smartphone demand is concerned. Here is Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow.
What we know is that, as expected, we have 2 variants of the base model iPhone 15, a 6.1-inch screen and a 6.7-inch screen. Both of them get the dynamic island, which is the top sliver of the screen, a more interactive display that displays more information. The big news so far on the low-end iPhone 15 is the upgrades to the camera, 48 megapixel. The iPhone 14 non-Pro versions a year ago had 12 megapixels, so that's a pretty substantive upgrade on the camera technology.
That is Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow. By the way, as of Friday, Apple will begin taking pre-orders for these latest iPhones in more than 40 countries. Rashad?
Right, well, we've got to stay with tech, and we've got the first antitrust trial pitting the federal government against a major tech company getting underway in Washington. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager has more from D.C.
The case is United States versus Google. The Justice Department is accusing Alphabet's search giant of paying more than $10 billion a year to maintain its position as the default search engine on the web and mobile devices. Federal prosecutors say Google has been a monopoly for more than a decade and controls more than 89% of the online search market. Google denies the government's claims. U.S. District Judge Amit Mehta is expected to issue a decision next year. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
We go to the oil market next, and the latest data from OPEC Plus showing global oil markets will face a supply shortfall of more than 3 million barrels a day in the next quarter. Now, this obviously comes after both Saudi Arabia and Russia decided to extend their production cuts until the end of 2023. Now, today's news did send oil prices surging. WTI, we talked about it rising today by around 1.8%. Brent crude back above 92 a barrel. We heard earlier today from Francisco Blanch. He is the head of global commodities and derivatives at Bank of America. He thinks Saudi Arabia and OPEC Plus will become more cautious if prices continue to rise.
Well, I think that the Saudis have always been very cautious about avoiding demand destruction episodes. And certainly, I think they will become cautious again if prices break through $100 a barrel, because as we saw last year with gas, with natural gas, if prices do get out of whack, you can lose a lot of demand. European natural gas demand from industry, remember, is lower today than it was at this time last year with a 90% decline in prices. So you have to be careful what you wish for.
Francisco Blanch there from Bank of America. By the way, the International Energy will report its outlook on Wednesday.
All right, we're going to stay with oil companies and have a look at BP CEO Bernard Looney, because he's resigned effective immediately. The company saying that Looney didn't fully disclose personal relationships. The surprise development leaving the oil and gas giant leaderless at a crucial juncture. BP is trying to persuade investors to stick with it through a costly transition to low-carbon energy. We heard more from Bloomberg's Alex Steele.
Looney had made the point that they were going to be investing less and less and less in oil and gas. But as the returns for alternative energy got worse and worse and worse, they cannot live up to the returns that you're going to get in an oil and gas field. So we had to pare back some of that lack of investment.
That is Bloomberg's Alex Steele. Now, BP didn't name any potential successor to Looney, but the chief financial officer will replace him on an interim basis. That's Murray Auchincloss. BP typically has chosen CEOs from among the ranks of its own top executives.
We go to China next, where home sales in the country seem to be losing momentum, even though authorities recently loosened restrictions on mortgages. Bloomberg's Yvonne Mann has more from Hong Kong.
Checks by industry watchers are saying that the rebound is fading in China's Tier 1 cities. In Beijing, sales of existing homes plunged 35% in less than 2 weeks. That's according to one of China's top property agencies, Centiline. Across China, transactions continue to drop, falling more than 20% by area. The fading rebound raises doubts on whether the steps are enough to revive the market before a crucial busy season. Economists say more aggressive easing measures may be needed to ensure a strong recovery. In Hong Kong, I'm Yvonne Mann, Bloomberg Radio.
The latest survey of global fund managers from Bank of America was very interesting. It shows a dramatic shift in investors' equity allocation, a rush toward the U.S., and a huge exit from emerging markets. EM equity allocation down in the month of September to net 9% overweight. But here's the thing. We were net 34% overweight in August. Now, this is largely a story about China and a lot of the negative pessimism or the negative sentiment that we have seen there. In fact, this B of A survey also shows the most likely source of any potential systemic credit event will be in the China real estate market. Daybreak Asia and an update on global news is next. We begin with U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy launching an impeachment probe in President Joe Biden. Ed Baxter with more from the Bloomberg Newsroom.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Douglas. McCarthy calls the Biden administration a culture of corruption.
House Republicans have uncovered serious and credible allegations into President Biden's conduct. Taken together, these allegations paint a picture of a culture of corruption.
Now, McCarthy says it will focus on son Hunter.
I do not make this decision lightly. And regardless of your party or who you voted for, these facts should concern all Americans.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says while he feels for the pressure McCarthy's feeling from the right wing of his party,
I think the impeachment inquiry is absurd. The American people want us to do something that will make their lives better, not go off on these chases and witch hunts.
Now, Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson says politically his use of terms like witch hunt.
Democrats who are saying this is a witch hunt and that this is, how dare they do the inquiry without a full House vote ahead of time. And it's funny to watch one party see the other party using their own playbook against them.
Republicans also have condemned Biden for what they call the weaponization of the Justice Department. New COVID-formulated shots in the U.S. have gotten a green light from the CDC advisory panel. The panel recommending the full CDC itself recommend use for those 6 months and older. Says it could allow the shots to be administered as early as this week. Now, of course, that will depend on individual healthcare providers getting supply and scheduling appointments and those kinds of things. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has been meeting with Russian officials, presumably about an arms deal, even though the U.S. is warning against it. Brigadier General Patrick Ryder speaking for the White House.
We would call on North Korea to meet its previous stated public commitments not to supply weapons to Russia, which will only end up prolonging the unnecessary war in Ukraine.
And Vladimir Putin is being quoted in Russian media saying war will continue for a while. Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville says he will continue to block the promotions of military people until the Biden administration removes the executive policy regarding DOD travel and reproductive rights. In an exclusive Bloomberg interview,
2023, they want to change it with a memo from the White House. We're not a communist country. Everything that's made policy and law goes through Congress. And I told them that. If you change it, I'm going to block your admirals and generals. Well, at that time, there was 1 or 2. Now we're up to 300. I think they're starting to believe me that I meant what I said.
And on balance of power says the solution simple.
Let's just vote on it. And if it passes, if it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah, critics argue he's paralyzing the Pentagon. Global news powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries in San Francisco. I'm Ed Baxter, and this is Bloomberg.
Let's get to our guest. Belita Ong is with us. Belita is chairman of Dalton Investments. She joins us from Santa Barbara, California. Belita, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for making time to chat with us. Maybe you had a chance to look at the Bank of America survey today of global fund managers. A big move away from emerging markets right now. Is that a strategy that you would adopt at the moment, given the weakness that we have been describing for the Chinese economy?
Hello, Doug. Thanks for having me back. The movement, as you mentioned, has everything to do with China and the reducing of exposure to China, which was for decades an extremely profitable place to invest in. You know, from our point of view, we've not invested since Jack Ma was hauled in to be re-educated, which is now a few years ago. And it's simply because of the way we invest. We look for value companies that are led by entrepreneurs whose interests are aligned with ours. And in China, the most successful entrepreneur was punished for being too successful. And on top of that, that was followed by the whole private tutoring shutdown. So one day you had a great business and the next day it was gone. So given those types of risks, it's just not a market that we can invest in. That's not to say that you can't make money in China. I don't believe that at all. I think you can. It's just not the way we do it because it doesn't fit with our investment criteria. And if we don't invest in China, then there are many other places to invest in. So it's not as though being shut out of China is a death knell to our investment capabilities across Asia.
But that, so there has been a kind of, I suppose, feeling that the regulatory clampdown has perhaps disappeared, but it can come back at any stage. But curiously, you mentioned the other places you can invest to make money. So where are you looking?
Well, we are still very positive on being able to add returns above the benchmark in both Japan as well as in India. And in Japan, it's largely to do with the fact that Japan's in this great spot right now where finally the economy's growing. Finally, the deflation they've suffered for decades seems to be reversing. So we finally saw a small increase in wages in the last negotiations. And the BOJ is inclined, I believe, to continue to keep rates as low as possible through the next round of negotiations so that they can keep wage increases, thereby fueling consumer spending for the economy. So it's sort of like opposite world in Japan, where with the rest of the world is concerned about inflation, but Japan's been fighting deflation for so long that they won't give up that fight until they see that it's really, well ensconced.
You were talking about the entrepreneurial spirit, and I'm wondering whether that applies to Vietnam. And the indication here is that there is some opportunity to grow for the local economy in technological terms, and I'm wondering whether that's a market that you would consider.
Yes, it's certainly a market we would consider. In fact, we're in the process of getting access to that market now, because you need special access to be able to invest in the domestic market there. But it is a market that we think is becoming more and more interesting. And in the past, when we have invested, we've done it through closed-end funds, which are run by people we know well and which often trade at a discount. But we're actually taking steps to invest directly ourselves. So yes, it's a market that we find interesting. But in Japan, if I could go back to that, in addition to the fact that the economy is doing well, the cheap yen makes car exports, for example, do extremely well. And you've got a lot of foreign inflows that we haven't seen in ages, which also helps with the domestic market. And on top of all that, you've had this, finally, you're seeing the results of 8-9 years of corporate governance reform lead to much better behavior by managements in Japan, increase in buybacks, dividends, more M&A, and more management buyouts. So, everything's going well for Japan right now.
Belita, very quickly, so you do also, away from Japan, look at the, I suppose, deglobalization or de-risking story.
Yes, absolutely. The de-risking story is very good for certain countries. India, for example, she's the prettiest girl at the dance. Everybody wants to work with her, dance with her.
The prettiest girl in the dance. We'll leave it there. Belita, always a pleasure. Belita Ong, chairman of Dalton Investments. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Asia, your morning brief on the stories making news from Hong Kong to Singapore and Wall Street.
Look for us on your podcast feed every day on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each day on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM Channel 119, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Doug Krisner.
And I'm Rashad Salamat. Join us again tomorrow for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.